Ezras Hashem. Today's daf is Masechta Menachos Daf Mem Tes, and we will start. We'll start from the top, and here we go. We're just going to finish up our discussion over here. We're discussing over here the Kifsei Hoatzeres, and we're going through a bunch of possibilities of what could happen. So here's the. Remember on the Shtei Halechem. Remember you have the two breads. And then you bring two sheep, as you can see on the screen here. Now, these sheep were for a shlomim, right? They're shlomim, right? They're shlomims. Now, they can easily be confused with an ayil, a ram. Now, part of the service was that you also brought 1 cow, 2 rams, 7 sheep for an oila. So there's one set brought for oilus, and one is brought for shlomim. The shlomim is the main thing that permits us to eat the shtei alechem. So Tanu, we start from the top of the page. Tanu Rabba Babachona Kamei de Rav. Rabba Babachona. Hi, Louis. We just began, and we're holding Daf Mem Tesam at Aleph. First line. Tana Rabba Babachona Kamei de Rav. Rabba Babachona taught a brisa in front of Rav. Kifse Atzeres. A man, the Kohanim, I don't know how this could happen, but the Kohanim on Shavuos, the sheeps that are supposed to be for a shlomim, sheshachta lishum elim. He slaughtered it as if they were the rams brought for a carbon oila. So what happens? We don't know if he did it on purpose, if he did it by mistake. The Kohen slaughtered it and said, I'm sechting this. Without looking, he says, this is the ram for the oila. So kesheren, it's kosher probably as an oila. It's not a carbon that you have to throw out. You bring it as an oila. He turned that shlomim into an oila. And the Jewish people, here labaila means the tzibor, the Jewish people have to bring a new shlomim, two new sheep, because he shechted the 2 sheep as if they were thinking they were the rams. Maybe they look like a ram. Remember, a ram is only a month older than a sheep in halacha. So that was the opinion of the brisa. Amalei Rav says disagree. Alu. The Jewish people do not have to bring 2 new sheep. They were yotzei the mitzvah of bringing shlomim. In other words, it remains a shlomim. It remains a shlomim, and because of that, therefore, they don't have to bring new shlomim. Now, how does that make sense? A guy screaming that if the Kohen was saying that it's the rams and it's for the oila, so how does Rav say it's the shlomim? Amar Rav Chizda says, Mistavra Misla the Rav. I think that the words of Rav were said in the following situation. The Kohen, when he approached these animals, Kichsaver Elim, he thought they were rams. In his mind, he thought they were rams. But when he shechted it, but then he shechted it and saying, I'm shechting it as a sheep. So when he approached the animals, he thought they were a ram. Then he said, you know what? I'm going to say that these are sheep and I'm shechting it for a shlomim. So in his mind, he thought he did something wrong. But it turns out in his actions, he did the correct thing. So therefore it's kosher. He shechted a sheep for the shlomim, and therefore the tzibur was yotzeh the shlomim, because he shechted a sheep for a sheep, even though in his mind he thought that he was doing a ram. So it's like the expression that I thought I was wrong, and it turned out I was right anyway. So that's the situation over here. Aval, but what happens? Kisavar Elim, he's thinking it's rams. Ushakton l'shem Elim. Then he actually said, I'm shechting these sheep as if they're the rams for the oila. Oh, then he actually made the mistake, and loy. Then it's not kosher. It's not a kosher It's not a kosher for the shlamim because akira beto is have akira. When he uprooted it, he made a mistake, and it's uprooting it. He's uprooting it from a shlamim to a oila, and that's even though he's made a mistake. It's too bad. Your mistake caused the change from a shlamim to an oila. Now, the truth is that if he would have known it was sheep, he wouldn't have made the change. But nevertheless, since he made a mistake, the change takes effect. Rabba says, Akira betos lo yahavi Akira. The uprooting that he made, a mistake, that's not considered an uprooting. An uprooting that was done in error is not an uprooting. Since if he would have known that these were sheep, he would have never said, I want it to be rams. That's what he tells us. So the fact that he made a mistake and said, I'm going to shech them as if they were rams, it doesn't turn them into an oila. They actually remain a shlamim. So that's the machlokes. An uprooting by mistake, does it change the name of the animal, or does it not change the name of the animal? Amar Rava said, Umaisvino ashbaita. Rava said, I'm going to ask you a question from a brisa. The brisa says, HaKohanim shepiglu b'migdash. A kahanim that made pigel in the base of Migdash. A guy, a regular person brought a carbon, and the kohen messed up with his thoughts. And for example, he shechted it with the wrong zman in the mind. He's thinking a bad thought. So in the base of Migdash, a kohen did that to your carbon. So mezidim, if the kohen did it on purpose, he was in a bad mood. So then chayavin, he has to pay the owner of the carbon back money because he parceled the owner's carbon. But if he did it by mistake, piturim, we say that the kohen, doesn't have to pay the owner back. It's part of their job. We allow him to make mistakes. But even if he made a mistake, the Tana Allah, the Brisa continues, or it's another Brisa that explains pigul and pigul, that even if he made a mistake, the carbon is still a pigul carbon. Even if the whole act that the kohen had a bad thought was a mistaken bad thought. So the Gemara says, hey, Chadami, what's the case that you made a mistake and you made a bad thought? If you want to say that he knew the animal was a chatas. A chatas is eaten that day and night, right? And then he says, I know this is a chatas. The guy brought me a carbon chatas, and the kohen says, I'm going to say shlamim. Shlamim is a pigel thought to a chatas because a chatas could be only eaten that day, and a shlamim you have that day, night, the next day also. So he did it on purpose. But that's not the case that the Bryce is talking about, because shoygigin, that's a mistake. Mezidin havel, that's something he did on purpose. Elalav, it must be the kasava shlamimhu. He thought it was a shlamim. The komachashe ba l'shum shlamim, and he says, I'm making it a shlamim. In other words, the owner brought a chatas, but the kohen took down the information wrong. He's thinking it's a shlamim, and that's why he says, I'm shechting it as if it's a shlamim. But had the kohen known that it was a chatas, he certainly wouldn't have done this mistake. It's only because he's making a mistake that he's thinking it's a shlamim. Really, it was a chatas, but he's thinking it's a shlamim, and therefore he says, I'm shechting it for a shlamim. So it's a total mistake. Ukatani, and we say pigul and pigul. He could parcel the carbon with the mistake. Alma akira betois hava akira. And even if you make a mistake, it's still effective. So what we see from here is that even if, in this case, we can apply it over here, even if the kohen thought that these sheep are the oila, it will turn into the oila, even if the whole thing was a mistake. So this is a question against Rabbah. Rabbah said, Akir b'taris lo yavaki. If you make a mistake, you didn't do anything wrong.
Baruch, I have one quick question.
Yeah.
But the whole, it's effective, meaning that it's sanctified as an ola.
No.
What about the Baal? What about the Baal? He wanted to be a shlomin, and now it's going to be an ola.
Well, so they have to bring new shlamims.
Okay. substitute, but it's definitely effective. It's not just he can eat the meat. He's
No,
actually, well, he can't eat the meat in Ola anyway. He could eat it, the shlomim, but it basically it's effective as an Ola,
as a change, right?
as a change. Okay.
Very effective change. And we're not talking about over here. It's the same thing with a yochid, but here we're talking about the tzibor.
All right. The
The
public. Right.
congregation paid for this.
Right.
Because the kohen on Shavuos was sloppy and thought that it was the ram, so he by
Right.
mistake sechted it for an oila. So the
Right.
question is, does it turn into the oila, and does the tzibor now have to pay for
Mm.
2 sheep?
Okay.
According to Rabbah, no. Right? What did Rabbah say? If you do it, akir b'tois is not an effective change. And Rav Chizda says, Rav Chizda is the other one that says akir b'tois is an effective change. And so from this brisa, you see that akira b'tois is an effective change. Because by mistake, you could make pigel. A guy brought a carbon chatas, a regular day. A guy brought a carbon chatas, and the kohen thinks it's a shlamim and shechts it as a shlamim. The kohen wasn't malicious. If he would have known it's a chatas, he would have shechted it as a chatas. And yet, the carbon is possible. It's a pigel carbon. So we see an akira b'tois is an effective change. Amalei Abaya says no. La'olam, that Bryce is talking about the yada the chatas. The kohen knows it's a chatas. And he says outright it's a shlomim. So it's not a mistake. He's not really making a mistake. He is on purpose trying to change it. But why is it called a mistake? It was ba'omer muta, because he thinks that you could change it. So it's a totally different case than an absolute mistake. Here is like somewhat of a mazid. Therefore, the change could happen. But if you're totally making a mistake, maybe the change will not happen. So now we ask another question. Masav Rab Zera. Zera asked the question. Rab Shimon says, Kol menachos nikbetzu shloi lishma. If you make a mincha that you made the kamitza without thinking that's the right mincha. There are different types of minchas. Minchas soilas, minchas this, minchas macheshes, minchas machmas, minchas. So if you did it shloi lishma, nevertheless it's kosher. And after doing the mitzvah, the bailam does not have to replace it. It's fine. He was yaitza. Because she'ein ha-menachos doimes lizvachim, says Rab Shimon, a menachos, it's hard to make an obvious mistake. Sha'akoimitz machvas l'shur marchetzes, if you try to do a kmitza on a machvas type of a machvas type of mincha is dry. It's like crushed matzah, right? And l'shur marchetzes, and you say, "Oh, this is like a soft sponge cake." It doesn't feel the same. Ma'asel, anybody who's observing you, everybody can see that it's a machvas. You see, everybody can see it's a machvas, and you're trying to say, "Oh, it's a marcheshes." So it doesn't. Everybody knows that you're making a mistake. Or chareva l'shimbelula. Let's say you're doing a kamitza on a chareva, a dry, without oil type of mincha, for like a minchas chayte or something like that. And you're saying, oh, this is an oily mincha. You're doing you announce it's an oily mincha. It's a blula, it's an oily mincha, blula. But it's proof that you can't be making a mistake, because it's obvious in your hands that you're not making a mistake. It's obvious that it's something different. So says Rab Shimon that therefore, if you do the kmitza shloi lishma, you didn't effectuate anything, and it's still a kosher. It's still a kosher zmicha. Avos v'acham came by karbonis. It's not. If you take a chatas and turn it into a shlamim by mistake, it works. Shchita achas lekulim, because by carbon you can't tell the difference. It's one shechting, one animal, kabbalah achas lekulim, one accepting of the blood, zrika achas lekulim, and one type of sprinkling. It's very hard to make a mistake. It's very hard to differentiate between one carbon and the other. Even zrika, with all carbonis, just one sprinkling on the mizbeach, yaitza. So now hechedami. So what's the case of the mistake by the mincha? If the guy on purpose knows that it's a machvas type of matzah type of mincha, and he's making the kamitza and saying, "Oh, this is a soft type of mincha." Who cares if it doesn't work because even if it shouldn't work because everybody knows it's obvious that he's saying nonsense. But if he on purpose wants to uproot it, so then of course it takes effect. If he did it b'mezid, of course it takes effect. The Bryce is talking about the mincha. It was a mistake. The ksavar marcheshes. He thought it's a marcheshes, soft. V'kom it's lemish marcheshes. V'ta. He made a mistake. It means he looked at it and he can't tell the difference between a machves and a marcheshes, even though to us it's obvious. But he made a mistake and he thought it was marcheshes, and he made the kmitza as a marcheshes. The hachahu de masel machichem. Here we say it doesn't take effect. Habi alma, but any other mistake in karbonos, not minchas, but regular karbonos, akira betois. If you're making a mistake, havi akira, it does take effect. So we see again a question according to an opinion of Rav Chizdu, a rabba who said akira betois loy have akira. Answers the Gemara, Amalei Abaya. Abaya said loylam the other the machvasi. He really did it on purpose by the mincha. It's not talking about mistakes. He did it on purpose. He knows it's a machmas. The kakamatz le mishur marcheshes, and he says, I want it to be marcheshes. He's doing it on spiteful. Who cares? Why shouldn't it take effect? At the end of the day, who cares if everybody knows he's talking nonsense? Why shouldn't it take effect if he does it on purpose? So Rava l'tamei, Rava will go according to his reasoning. Dama Rava, machshava deloy minker psal rachmana. A machshava that nobody can tell you're making a mistake or you're doing it on purpose, pasal rachmana, then it takes effect. Machshava deminkeri, but a statement that everybody knows you're talking nonsense, loy pasal rachmana, will not take effect. So this is not a question against any other opinion. So bottom line is we remain with the machlokes. If someone makes a total mistake, does he effectuate change? Can he turn, in our case, the shlomim into an oil? If he thinks that these are rams and shechtes it for rams, but really they're sheep and they were supposed to be for the shlomim, did he turn them into oil? And therefore the tzibur has to bring new sheep to replace it. And that's exactly what Rav Chizda said. Akira b'toy is have akira. You made a change. Rabbi said the tzibur, no, it still remains a shlamim, because had the kohen known it was a sheep, he would have shechted a sheep. He's not a spiteful person, so he made a total mistake, so it doesn't effectuate change. Okay, let's go into a new Mishnah, new topic. Hatmidim ein ma'akvenes masofim. Very simple. If you don't have sheep, so let's say on Shabbos you didn't have sheep, so and you couldn't bring the tamins, that shouldn't stop you from bringing the musaf. So let's say you didn't bring the tamid shel shachar, you could still bring the musaf. And if you don't have the musaf, if you didn't do the musaf sheep, if you don't have enough of the musaf sheep, shouldn't stop you from bringing the tamid shel bein arbayim. We're going to discuss this in the Mishnah. And not the, let's say on a Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, you're supposed to do two musafs, one for the Shabbos, one for the Rosh Chodesh. If you just did the Shabbos, if you only have enough sheep to do the Shabbos musaf, or if you have only enough sheep to do Rosh Chodesh musaf, you shouldn't stop from bringing anything. You should do whatever you can, basically. I guess there may have been a shortage of sheep. So the Mishnah is saying, whatever you can do, you can do. Now, let's say, let's say, b'mezid, the Jewish people, the Kayanim in charge, did not bring the sheep, the morning carbon tamid. Yakrivu ben arbayim. They can bring the second sheep. They can bring the afternoon carbon, even if they purposely didn't bring the first carbon. Amar Rabbi Shimon quickly disagrees. Amasai, when do I say that? If there was some oinus or they were mistaken, that's why they didn't bring the tamid shel shachar. Then we tell them you can bring the tamid shel bein arbayim. If they absolutely did it on purpose not to bring the keves, the morning tamid, like krivu keves b'boiker, then we punish that group of kahanim, and we don't lo yakrivu bein arbayim. We don't allow them to bring the bein arbayim. We punish that group, that family, and we bring in a replacement group to bring the Bein Rabayim. And then Rabbi Shimon says other things. Lo yaktiru kataris baboika, yaktiru Bein Rabayim. We know for kataris every day, they took a pound of the kataris, about a pound and a quarter, and split it. Half in the morning, half they were makter on the Mizbeach at night, the incense. So if they didn't do the morning, they just bring the other half at night. Rab Shimon, if they didn't bring the morning one, it's one mitzvah. So they bring the whole pound, the whole mana, they do it in the afternoon. They don't inaugurate the Mizbeach Azov, the K'taris Mizbeach, only with one mana. They do it one mana at a time. So you see that you can do one mana even at one shot. You don't have to split it. If you're inaugurating the Mizbach Ha'olah, the outside, you start off, the first carbon should be on this Mizbeach is a Talmud of the morning. If they replace the Shulchan, so they put the new breads on Shabbos. If they let's say they brought a new menorah, they light it at night. They light it at night with the 7 lamps, and that's how they inaugurate the menorah. We'll discuss more of this in the Mishnah. So Gemara asks the question, and then brings in the Mishnah. Let's say tzibur she'ein lohem tamidim u'musafim. The tzibur doesn't have sheep enough for the tamid and the musaf. In other words, even though I know one sheep, let's say, is for a carbon tamid, right? The Torah tells you that for the musaf, usually you brought 7 sheep, or on Shabbos you brought 2 sheep, but b'diavad you could bring 1 sheep. Let's say there's 1 sheep there, only 1 sheep in the Beis Hamikdash. What should you use it for? Ezimam koidim. Which should you use it for, the tamid or the musaf? Hey Chedami, says the Gemara, what's the case? Let's say it's Shabbos. You have 1 sheep. You could use it as the tamid or the musaf of Shabbos. So pshita tamidim adifa. Certainly, you should use it for the tamid of Shabbos. The havalei tadir, tamid comes every day. Umukudish, and on Shabbos the tamid takes on a higher kedusha to it. So therefore, the tamid will take precedence. Ela tamidin l'macha misafin de'idna. What happens is you have, let's say, 3 sheep. Let's say you have 3 sheep. You could be makriv a musaf. You could be makriv a tamid shel bein rabayim, and you could be makriv a tamid of the next day, of Sunday morning. That extra sheep, could you use it for the sheep of the musaf of Shabbos, or should you hold off from using it so you'll have a sheep for Sunday morning? So tamidim adifa is, should you hold it off for the tamidim of Sunday morning shekain tadir, because that tamid comes often. Idilmo, maybe misafin edira, use it on Shabbos to have a mekudesh because it's holy. Does something that comes often take precedence of something that's more holy? Amalei. So this was a question of Chiya bar Ravin asked from Chizda. So Rav Chizda responded to Nisiu. That is the case of our Mishnah. Hatamidim ein ma'akvinas musafid. If you're missing, you only have tamid. You don't stop you from bringing the musaf. The musaf should not stop you. If you're missing a musaf, don't stop from bringing the tamid. So now, hey Chedami, what's the case of the Mishnah? Is the Mishnah talking about you have enough sheep? It's not a problem of sheep. No, the question of the Mishnah is, which should you do first, the tamid or the musaf? The tamid of Shachar and the musaf of Shabbos. Which should you do first? Is the Mishnah saying you have a choice, whichever one you want, you can do first? That's not true. But Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, how do you know that something shouldn't take precedence first before that you bring the Talmud Shel Shacha? The first thing that you bring on the Mizbeach is the Oila Shel Shacharis. So what is that? So for certainly that's not what our Mishnah is discussing. We go to Amebez. Elapshita, our Mishnah is discussing the Leslie. You only have 1 sheep. If it's talking about Shabbos, Amai, what's the question? Of course, Tamid of Shabbos takes precedence over Musaf of Shabbos. Tadar Makudish. The Shabbos Tamid is more holy than and more common than the Musaf of Shabbos. Tadar Adif. We're talking about a case where you only have enough to do musaf and tamid shaben abayim, should you, and you have an extra sheep that will leave over for Sunday morning, and the Mishnah is trying to tell you, should you use it for Sunday morning or should you use that sheep for Shabbos? Victoria Ein Ma'akvin says that the Mishnah says you decide. I don't care. Alma ki hadadininu. They're both the same. So if you want, use it for Mishnah for Shabbos. If you don't, if you want, use it for Mishnah for Sunday. It's up to you. And that's what our Mishnah is talking about. Malay Abaya says, no, you misread our Mishnah. Lo'ilam Disley. Our Mishnah is talking about there's no shortage there. There's plenty of sheep for Tamids and Musaf. Ulakadem. And the Mishnah is teaching you that if b'di eved you put the Musaf before bringing the Tamid Shel Shachar, you yaitze the Musaf. You don't have to redo the Musaf. But you have a question. Doesn't the pasuk say that nothing shouldn't be brought on the Mizbeach prior to the Tamid Shel Shachar? Yes, mitzvah bi'almo, that's a mitzvah, but it's not. If you did it, you would be eved yaitze the carbon. You would be eved yaitze the mitzvah. So our Mishnah is not talking about a shortage. Let's do another 2 minutes and then we'll stop. Tashema, come in here. Ein peichesin mishisha tloyim hamuvukarim belishkas atloyim kedei l'shabbos l'shtei yomim tovim shel Rosh Hashanah. You should have in that. They had a pen in the Beis Hamikdash, a pen, and they had sheep there that were checked for 4 days. In order to check for a mum, they require that you check for 4 days. So these sheep were checked for 4 days, and they're checked to see if they have any blemishes. So you should always have at least 6 sheep in that pen, because sometimes on Shabbos, when you have let's say Thursday, Friday is Rosh Hashanah, and then you have Shabbos. So how many sheep are you going to need for the 2 carbon tamids every day? You have 3 days, and you're not going to be able to replace it. So you're going to have at least to be able to cover Shabbos, the Yom Tov of Rosh Hashanah, Thursday, Friday of Rosh Hashanah, and Shabbos. So now, that's what it seems, what the Mishnah is saying. Now, obviously, what's the story over there? Why should you have only 6? Hey, Chidami, if you're going to tell me that there is no shortage, so then if there is no shortage, you have to have at least much more. Tamidim Musaf and Tuvahava. The Musaf, you should have plenty of sheep in there, because the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah is a 7 sheep. So each day is another 7 sheep. So, and Shabbos is another 2. So you need much more than 6. Ella Lav the Leslie. You don't have. And what do you see from there? That if you have a choice between a tamid, let's say of a tamid of Friday, which is the tamid of the 2nd day Rosh Hashanah, or to save the sheep to use it for a musaf of Shabbos. No, we say use it for the tamid of Friday, even though it is not as holy as the musaf of Shabbos. Shmamina tamidim adifa. Shmamina, the tamids are more important. So that should resolve our question. Answers the Gemara, loilam de islay. Our Mishnah is talking about, that Bryce is talking about there is no shortage. This was the Bryce is telling you. You shouldn't have you should have 6 sheep that were tested for 4 days, because not every animal that you bring as a carbon had to be checked for 4 days before the shechita. Only the ones that you're going to be using for a carbon tamid. Umani, the teaching of the author of this brayse is Ben Bagbag. Ben Bagbag, the Tanya Ben Bagbag, Oime Ben Bagbag says, we only familiar of Ben Bagbag in the Mishnayos others. But Ben Bagbag, Oime, he said other things. Every tamid animal, every sheep, needed to be checked 4 days. Not every sheep that you bring as a carbon oila, as a person, all you have to do is check it for 1 hour before you bring it into the carbon. They make 1 check. But for a carbon tamid, you needed a checking of 4 days. By the carbon Pesach, it says that they needed to wait for the carbon Pesach 4 days to test it out. In Mitzrayim, you needed to wait to tie it to your bedpost 4 days. And he had a Gzeir Shava that to teach you that the same idea, every carbon tamid that was brought in the base of Mikdash had to be checked for 4 days. So just like the carbon Pesach in Mitzrayim needed 4 days checking before the Shechita, therefore it needed checking 4 days every carbon. So therefore, it's not talking about musafs this. We just needed to have 6 sheep of things that were checked for 4 days beforehand, because those are unique, a requirement for a carbon tamid. And sometimes you have a 3-day yontif, a 3-day holiday, when you have 2 days Rosh Hashanah and Shabbos following each other. So you need to have at least 6 in there before you'll be able to replace it. So that's why that's the Bryce is talking about. It's not talking about if there is a shortage. So our question is not yet resolved.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good enough.
Have a great.
Continues the Gemara. Amalei Ravina Ravashi. So Ravina said to Ravashi, Hani Shisha Shiva Hava. Why you if we're talking about just carbon tumids, so you should have the supply for 7, because besides the 3 days of Thursday, Friday, and Shabbos, you're going to need for Sunday morning until you replace it. On the 3rd day, for example, or the way the way the question's asked, if suppose Shabbos came first and then you have 2 days Rosh Hashanah, so you need it for Tuesday morning carbon tumids. The Gemara says, according to your reasoning, Tamnaya Havi, you should have 8. The Ikadepanya de Mali Shapsa. You should have 8 in there, because you need for Erev Shabbos the carbon tamid before you start the Shabbos. If again Shabbos Sunday Monday, so you should have Friday afternoon. You should have at least 8 for Sunday morning and Friday afternoon. So you have 2 more. So the Gemara says, Halekashi, we don't count Friday afternoon till Basad Kama. After he was saying, the Bryce is talking about after you were makriv the Friday afternoon carbon of Tamid, how much should you have left in that pen? And there you need 6. So the question remains, then you should really have 7. Answers the Gemara, you should have 7. So the Gemara says, and this is what I was trying to say before, that the Tana is not talking about a situation where it exactly happened that way. The Tana is talking about it on a regular day, a regular Wednesday. You open up the base pen in the base of Mikdash on a regular Wednesday, you should have 6 animals in there. And why does the Tana mention that we're talking about Shabbos and Yontif, 2 days Yontif? That was a simon to remember, simon in Ba'alma, that it's the number 6. Because if Tana would have told you 6, you would think maybe 5, or you would think that you shouldn't have less than 6, so maybe you could have 5 or 4. But when you think about it in a more absolute terms, then you're not going to have less than the number 6, because you need for 2 days Shabbos, 2 days, and each day of Yontif. Deikinami. So the proof is the Ketani Kedei Shabbos, like Ketani Shabbos Bebeis Yontif Shal Rosh Hashanah. It says that not that you need it for Shabbos and Yontif, the amount of a Shabbos and 2 Yontif, but not that you actually, it's a real case that of Shabbos and 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, Shema Mina, that the minimum is 6. And why do you need 6? If it's a regular Wednesday, the answer is that if you're always behind, right? If you let it go down to 2, right? We are afraid that you're going to be makriv that 2 that day. And then the following day, you're not going to have any carbon to makriv, because according to Ben Bagbag, you need to have an animal that was checked for 4 days. So therefore, you should have at least a 3-day surplus in there, so that you could always do the constant replacement. So if you get rid of 2 in 1 day, so you have 4 left, you'll replace it with another 2. And that day is counted as a checking day. So by the time the one that you just brought in, by the time its day comes, it will be the 4th day. And therefore, that's how you always have a supply, not to run out, of animals for carbon tummies, which have this specific requirement that they had to be checked for 4 days. So end Daf Memtes.